Jaya Sriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Suryavansha Jayate. International Sanatana Dharma Society Jayate. May Dharma be ever victorious. Evam Bhavatu. May it be so. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the live stream Satsanga that is brought to you by the International Sanatana Dharma Society. As always, it is absolutely my pleasure to be here with you as I try to be every Monday. And for those who are new here, especially, welcome. What we do here every Monday is something that is extraordinary, actually. And that's putting it lightly. What we do here every Monday is something that is not like any other live stream or anything like that that exists anywhere on YouTube or Rumble or anywhere else. What we do is a very traditional satsanga, as has been carried out and carried down for thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years in the tradition known as Sanatana Dharma. And what we do is, usually I will give a talk, and it is based upon the Vedic scriptures. Well, I'll explain some aspect or another of our tradition, Sanatana Dharma. And then at that point, I open it up to questions from the audience. So we're going to be doing a special talk today, but before I explain that, let me just say a few very, very quick things, just a few announcements. First of all, sometime later this week, I can't say exactly which day, maybe Wednesday, Thursday, maybe Friday, we're going to be releasing a very special video. And the video is called Masculinity in the Kali Yuga. And what this is the recording of a Q&A session that I did on Discord, very specifically for my male disciples. And women were there too. No one was barred. That wasn't the point. But I very specifically, for approximately an hour and 40 minutes or so, did nothing but answer questions from my male disciples about men's issues, various men's issues, and not just philosophically, but in a very real way, just problems that some of my male disciples have encountered in their lives, relationship issues, etc., etc., etc. Well, this entire Q&A session was recorded, and indeed we will be releasing this on all of our platforms, including on YouTube. I checked and it's YouTube appropriate. So this will be released on our YouTube channel, Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, and other places as well. So again, look for that later this week, Masculinity in the Kali Yuga. And it's 100% Q&A, and I think that you'll find it absolutely fascinating. The other thing that I want to say is, first, I want to thank people who have been donating to the ISDS. As people may be aware, we are in the midst right now of our year-end fundraising campaign. Every year the ISDS does this, as do almost every nonprofit organization in America and throughout the world. And that is, we're trying to raise funds so that we can operate and expand into next year. If you'll look in the chat, you'll see that pinned to the top of the chat there is a link. And if you follow that link, that will take you to our donation page. If you find it within your heart to do so, and if and only if you have the means to do so, please consider giving a generous gift. to the International Sanatana Dharma Society. Again, that is the movement that is sponsoring what you're experiencing right now. But also, again, we have a movement that has been growing exponentially for several years now, and that now has a presence in approximately 70 nations throughout the world. That has only come about due to the volunteer work of hundreds and hundreds of individuals, due to the donations of, again, hundreds and hundreds of individuals. So if you find it within your heart to do so, please follow that link that is there pinned at the top of the chat, and please consider making a generous donation, only if you can. And I thank you in advance. Now, with that, let me talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing today, because indeed what we're going to be doing today is somewhat special in that it is going to be a multi-part series. And what we're going to be talking about very specifically is indeed how to be dear to God. You know, there are several verses, quite a few actually, in several different chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Krishna says, oh, if you do X, Y, and Z, you will be very dear to me. And very specifically, in this chapter, in chapter 12 that we're going to be looking at, there is a string of verses in which Krishna explains to Arjuna precisely what is necessary for him, that is for us, for any devotee to do, and he ends each of these verses in the same way, and that is, he is very dear to me, the person who does X thing. So this is a series. It's a very interesting series in which Krishna ends these verses in the exact same way. So this is why I knew it was important at some point to talk about these verses, and again, in a series. So in addition to tonight, in which we'll be looking at really only 2 of these verses, there are several of them, we will do this again next Monday and probably the Monday after. And we'll go through all of these verses in which Krishna, again, ends in this same way. He is very dear to me. And let me also talk about this and what is the profundity of this. We are Vaishnavas. And what that means very specifically, you see, if you go by the Wikipedia definition of what is a Vaishnava, you will not in a million years understand what is a Vaishnava. What it means to be a Vaishnava is not that, oh, I follow a specific sect known as Vaishnava. That is not what a Vaishnava is. Again, if you go to Wikipedia or Hinduism for Dummies or something like that, maybe that's the definition that you'll be given of what is a Vaishnava. Or a Vaishnava is a person who just happens to choose Vishnu as their object of worship. No, that's not what a Vaishnava is. What a Vaishnava is an individual who, A, wishes to know that which is ontologically the highest. Not 10th highest, not 100th highest, but truly the highest. In other words, a Vaishnava wants to know God. They want not just self-realization. Oh, they'll have that too. They want not just to commune with the gods. Oh, they will have that too. They want not just mystic powers. Oh, they'll have that too, and on and on and on. But rather, the first definition of a Vaishnava is that they are an individual who they wish to know God in the highest, unadulterated and purely so. That's the first thing. Philosophically, a Vaishnava, now B, is an individual who understands that God is a personality. Philosophically speaking and psychologically speaking, spiritually speaking, ontologically speaking, we understand that God is not a thing. God is not the force like in Star Wars. God is not an energy floating around that we can plug ourselves into and use at will. We understand that no, God is a person. God is a personality. This being the case, how truly profound is it that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also makes this very clear, with multiple verses, that indeed God is a person. God is indeed, to use Prabhupada's wonderful saying, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So God is indeed a person. And more than this, that God is a perfect person. God is the highest of all personalities, and that the way that we are to approach God in the highest is indeed to approach God as a personality. Now, for those who unfortunately they have been brainwashed by impersonalism, so-called non-dualism, etc., and they think that the idea of approaching God as a personality is a step down from the highest, no. We see in everyday life that if you have a relationship with, for me, I would actually go further. I would say if you have a relationship with even a pet, but let's just leave this to humans. If you have a relationship with a human being, if you are a real human yourself, and there's not something wrong with you, if you have a child, if you have a son or a daughter, if you have someone you love, a partner in your life, if you have a husband, if you have a wife, if you have parents, if you have good friends, if you have people who are important to you, they are just that. They are people. They are persons. They're not things. They're not energy floating in the sky. They're not objects that are there for your amusement, just to be used by you. Rather, you understand that what it means to be an ethical person, a moral human being, is that you approach your child as a person, not a thing, as a thou, not an it. Your son is not an it. Your daughter is not an it. Your husband, your wife is not an it, but rather their personalities. We understand this even in dealing with our fellow human beings. Again, for myself, I would actually, and I've extended that to dogs and cats and animals. I try to treat all beings with respect and as unique personalities. But now, when it comes to God, of course, we see that so many individuals who are ill-motivated, sadly, even unbeknownst to themselves, will try to denigrate God by seeing God as an it, not a thou. Well, if we understand that that is immoral to do with our fellow human beings, again, you don't see people as objects, you see them as personalities, as persons. Well, in the same way, we are to approach God in this way as well. We are to understand that God is not a thing, God is not a rock, God is not a it, God is not a hammer, etc., just there for our use, just there for us to show off how much we think we're very wrong, but how much we think we know about God. Rather, God is a person with whom, in the same way that with human persons, you must approach them in accordance with who they are. Not what you want them to be, but in accordance with that self-dignity that they have as a living being that you must respect. This is true for God as well. When we approach God in such a way that we are respectful of the fact that God is our source. We are not God's source. Indeed, we're the source of very little. Most people today who are in illusion are a source of pain for others. But God is the source of all good in both the spiritual and material realities. This being the case, the Vaishnava philosophically approaches that supreme absolute, Brahman, to use the Vedantic terminology, as a person, a personality. That person, that personality, is known as Sriman Narayana. In the Bhagavad Gita, of course, because the Bhagavad Gita was spoken by Bhagavan Sri Krishna, who is the avatara of Sriman Narayana, thus non-different, in this case, Krishna. Krishna is indeed that supreme personality. So now, with all this understanding, we can now begin to see the profundity of the verses that we're going to be looking at. Because again, how does Krishna end each and every one of these verses? If you want, you can feel free to read ahead. We're starting with these verses that we're doing now, but ultimately we'll end with verse 20, I believe. And you'll see that he ends these verses in the same way. That person who is my devotee, and again, it differs a little bit from verse to verse, but that's the gist. That person who is my devotee, quote, he is very dear to me. Thus, God is a person. God is a person who we can befriend, who we know is already our very best friend. No matter what, God is there with us. God never abandons us. We abandon God, but God never abandons us. We lose faith in God, but God never loses faith in us. God was there before we were born. God will be there after we leave this body. God is always with us as our very best friend, Priya, friend. In the same way that we are very dear to God, in the same way, this is the nature of bhakti itself, that we are to approach God as that being who is dearest to us, and when we do so, we then in turn are dear to God. So now, with this understanding, let's look at these beautiful verses who are here. Very good. And these are two verses very specifically that are Bhagavad Gita, chapter 12, and verses 13 and 14. We're going to begin with this for this week. And this verse proceeds in this way. Krishna says, "One who is not envious, but who is a kind friend to all living entities, who does not think himself a proprietor, who is free from false ego, and equal both in happiness and distress, who is always satisfied and engaged in devotional service with determination, and whose mind and intelligence are in agreement with me. He is very dear to me." Beautiful, beautiful verse. So again, these are the words of Bhagavan Sri Krishna to his devotee, the great warrior, Arjuna. Now, let's go through this verse a little bit, and these two verses, I should say. And when we're done with these two verses, then at that point, we'll have some time for questions and answers, but not quite yet. So first of all, for one who is not envious, and we will stop there. We will stop there. I've spoken about this, about how of all the negative qualities, there are both positive and negative qualities that an individual human person can have. And of all of those negative qualities, very specifically, that an individual can have, the worst of them is envy. Envy/jealousy. And why is this the case? Well, this is the very first demeritorious behavioral characteristic that arises within that Atman who then falls into illusion, falls into the material world, is that as soon as they develop a sense of self-awareness, awareness of other, desire, and then will, the very next thing that happens is they have the ability to then devote everything that they are, that is, the Atman can devote everything that he is with all of his positive characteristics to God, or he can choose to be envious of God. Now, when that seed, that very first seed of envy develops in the Atman, that is the idea that, no, I don't want to serve God, I want to be God. As soon as that envy develops, that is of the nature of illusion. And it is as a result that ahankara, that false ego, false identity, mistaken idea of self then arises. And thus, the illusioned living being falls into the material world and begins to have all of their experiences here. So thus, Krishna begins in this way, because again, this is the worst behavioral characteristic that a living being can have, is envy. So he begins in this way. One who is not envious. Now, why does he begin in this way? Well, several reasons. First of all, as I said, it is the most important, let's say, thing that makes a person fall into the material world. But more than this, what he is indicating, what Krishna is indicating by starting with this little clause is that do not even pretend that you are beginning on the spiritual path unless first you can conquer envy, unless you first understand what is the nature of envy. That is, again, what is at the very root of our suffering. So first we have to deal with this. Don't even pretend you're spiritual. Don't drone on and on about Brahman and Vedanta and this and that and things that you read in Hindu comic books. No. First you deal with this before you can even begin to even claim to be positively spiritual. First you deal with envy. we must first conquer this negative seed that is there within us in such a way that, again, what envy does is it makes us jealous of not just God, but everything and everyone around us. It makes us resentful, it makes us spiteful, it makes us lustful, it makes us angry, etc., etc. Envy is the core root of every negative behavioral characteristic that a person can have. So first we do this. One who is not envious. Very good. But now Krishna presents the opposite of what is envy, what we should do. What is the very opposite of envy? Well, he says here, one who is not envious, but who is a kind friend to all living entities. So how interesting that Krishna juxtaposes these two things. That on the one hand, envy is horrible. Envy is hating all other human beings, being jealous of all other human beings, being spiteful, wanting what other living beings have, etc., etc. That's envy. So what are we to cultivate? It's very opposite. So we are to be a kind friend to all living entities. That is, when we see other living beings who are doing well, when we see other living beings who are growing in any way, spiritually or materially, again, rather than being jealous, rather than envying them, rather than being spiteful and saying, oh, why aren't I growing like this? It's not fair. The mantra of our age, it's not fair. Rather than that, when we see other living entities and they're doing well, it makes our heart warm and happy for them. This is what we are to cultivate. So before we can even begin spiritual life, first we have to address this fundamental issue of, on the one hand, rejecting envy, rejecting jealousy, spitefulness, etc. But then positively, we are to act as a friend toward all living beings, a kind friend. A kind friend. Oh, as I'm speaking, I don't. This is kind of revealing how my mind works. For every sentence that comes out of my mouth, there are several dozen that are actually occurring in my mind. I could just talk about this alone for the rest of the hour, which I won't. But how interesting is it that he even begins this entire section of multiple verses by explaining what is a true friend and what is not a true friend. Someone who is not a friend is someone who is envious of you. Someone who is a friend, someone who is a proper living being, is someone who is indeed kind toward you as a true friend. He begins with friendship, and then again, he goes over this again and again. One who is dear to me, one who is dear to me as a friend. But let's stop there with this clause, because again, I can say more, but we'll go on. And he continues with these qualifiers. Now, this is the good person. Who is this person? Who does not think himself a proprietor. You see, all of these items that we're now talking about are meant to counter that envy. So how do we rid ourselves of envy? Be a kind friend to all living entities, and also be one who does not think himself a proprietor. See, this also is the opposite of envy. So what does it mean to see ourselves as a proprietor? It means that we take too seriously, other than the official fact of this, we take too seriously the fact that we own things. You know, now, is it an official fact? Here, this is my cup. I paid for this. I own this cup. No one else uses this cup. This is Acharyaji's cup. Everybody at this temple knows that. No one uses it. It's my cup. Now, is that officially the case? Yes, it's officially the case. However, am I attached to this cup? The cup can break in an hour. I'll get another one. I'm actually not attached to it in any way whatsoever. This is what is meant by proprietorship. How? Technically, legally even, officially, yes, I own such and such. Oh, a person, they can say, I own a car, I own a house, I own this, I own that, etc., etc. Nothing wrong with that. However, we must understand that ultimately we are to be detached from such ownership. While technically we do own these things and thus we're responsible for them, ultimately everything is a gift from God. This cup, even though I paid for it, It's a gift from God. Everything that I have, these clothes that I'm wearing, my own body is a gift from God. And this is how we are to approach proprietorship. That on the one hand, yes, one person might literally own next to nothing. Another person might own multiple properties. And most people are kind of in between. They own a few things. We acknowledge that, but we're not attached. We don't identify with the property. It's not, oh, who am I as Acharyaji? Acharyaji is the person who owns this cup. Is that really my identity? Well, for some people, they do identify with their things to such a degree that's how they think of themselves. Who am I? I'm the person who has $1.8 million in the bank. That is who I am. No, it's false identity. That's ahankara. That's false ego. That is precisely what is meant by false identity, false ego. You're not the person who owns $1.8 million in the bank. Rather, you happen to have that. Use it responsibly, but you are so much more than this. You are not your property. So this is what Krishna is saying here, that he does not think of himself as a proprietor. I own things, but I am not the things I own. And I am not defined by them. Now let's go on. Who is free from false ego? And here we are. Who are free from false ego. So again, this is the person who is on the positive trajectory to knowing himself and knowing God. Such an individual must make himself free of false ego, that is, false identity. You know, it's interesting, Prabhupada very correctly translates ahankara as false ego. I use that term all the time, actually, it's quite correct. But I also like to say false identity as well, because linguistically, Sanskritically, it's just as correct. If you look at the construction of the very term, ahamkara. False identity is also a proper translation of this. And I like to use false identity also because it gives us a clearer picture. Every living being identifies with something. Now, for most living beings, naturally, it just tends to be their body. You look at animal life especially, they identify with their body. Does a, let's say, collie breed of dog even know that it's a collie breed of dog? No, not really. It identifies with its body and the body's immediate needs. This is the truth for most animals. Sadly, this is the truth also for many human beings as well, that they will identify only with their body. But then many also identify by extension with other things. Oh, this is my nationality, this is my height, this is my age, this is my this is my that, etc., etc. We have this false sense of identity where we're identifying with something, most of which is not true, most of which is not the case. So, what does it mean to be free from false ego? It means very specifically that we are free from this false identity. Very, very specifically. So now, with that understood, let's go on a little bit more. And who is equal both in happiness and distress. Who is equal both in happiness and distress. Now again, like with proprietorship, a person can misunderstand. Indeed, most people, most of the time, do misunderstand what the Vedic scriptures are saying. Most people, sadly, do have great misunderstandings about what the Vedic scriptures are saying. But this is one instance in which, again, a person can have a misunderstanding. Just like with proprietorship, it doesn't mean we can't own anything. We can own things, just don't identify with that which you own. They don't define you. You are transcendental to them. In the same way, one who is equal in both happiness and distress. A person very easily can, and in discussions with me over the last 40 years, I have encountered people who have mistakenly said this. Oh, so this means we're just not to care. We're supposed to be like rocks. We're supposed to be individuals who, oh, happiness can come, distress can come, and we just don't care. No, it's not that we don't care. Not at all. It's that, again, we are not attached to happiness or distress. Does every living being very naturally veer toward that which will make them happy, toward that, rather than that which will give them distress? Of course they do. Indeed, even the greatest of yogis do. Even the greatest of yogis do. If a yogi is traversing a path and they have two choices before them, they can walk a path that is covered with lotus petals or a path that's covered with glass. Unless, again, there's something wrong with that yogi, they're not going to choose the path of glass. Unless that's their specific tapasya that they've taken a vow to do, but that's a crazy tapasya I've never heard of. No. As living beings, of course, we choose to have happiness, not suffering. Indeed, that's why we're on the spiritual path. We want our suffering to end. So on the one hand, no, we don't treat this duality as if they have zero meaning, but this is the important point. Again, we do not define ourselves by either happiness or distress. We transcend both states in our day-to-day life, in our day-to-day living. We understand that such is the nature of the world, that forget about day by day, hour by hour. This hour, I'm on top of the world. The next hour, everything's horrible. And then the next hour, again, I am so grateful and so happy. And then the next hour, why is this happening to me? It's not fair. Etc., etc. This is sadly how most people live their lives. And what does this lead to? Perpetual suffering, true suffering, on top of the distress that we're feeling of that duality of happiness and distress. The entire project gives us suffering to the point where even when we're happy for that 1 hour, we're actually in suffering, waiting for it to turn around and now be distress. So what does the yogi do? They understand the nature of happiness and distress, that they come of their own accord, like the winter and summer seasons. And they understand such is the nature of this world. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, and then you're up again, and then you're down again, etc., etc. And you understand that regardless of what you are experiencing right now, something so-called happy is happening, something so-called suffering is happening. You understand that you within, ultimately, as Atman, as eternal spirit soul, are unaffected. And you have the strength, you have the control, you have the willpower to say, I transcend both and I am affected by neither. Something happy is happening now? Nice. I will enjoy. That's very nice. Oh, something horrible is happening now? That's unfortunate, but I'm fine because I ultimately am eternal spirit, unaffected by anything. So thus, such an individual who is on the positive path, the positive trajectory, they are equal in both happiness and distress. And now let's go on. Who is always satisfied. Let us stop there. Who is always satisfied. See, this is one of the hallmarks of what it means to be within the material world. Is a lack of satisfaction. You see this in, again, animals. You see this in humans. Sometimes you see it in yourself, where you're not satisfied. There's just something in you that's always spurring you on to search and search and look and look and look. Look for pleasures here. Look for something there. Oh, let me go on the internet and go to 1,000 websites. Let me scroll through social media. Let me search and search and search. What am I searching for? Oh, sometimes I don't even know. What am I searching for? Who knows? But you're searching and you're searching and you're searching because you have a fundamental existential dissatisfaction that is there seemingly in the pit of your being. That's suffering. That's suffering. When you find that you're always searching for something. What's the next toy I can find? What's the next video game? What's the next this? What's the next flavor? What? There's a new flavor of ice cream. Oh my God. But you're never satisfied. That is ultimate suffering. That is what leads to tension. That's what leads to anxiety. That is what leads to ultimately depression and sadness on the part of the individual. But rather than taking that materialistic path, the spiritual person understands, due to, again, all of these various things that were discussed now previously. So being free from false ego, being a kind friend to all living entities, being equal to happiness and distress, etc., etc. As a result of following these things, what now occurs within the spiritual person is something wondrous. They're now satisfied. They're now satisfied, and it's a real satisfaction. It's a satisfaction that transcends anything in the material world. And more, with that satisfaction comes peace. See, dissatisfaction is the very foundation of the opposite of peace. The reason why people don't have peace within is because they're dissatisfied, because they're searching, and that stress is there that they can't find what they're looking for, and again, often they don't even know what they're looking for. And as a result, they don't have peace within. Well, when you have that satisfaction, now you have peace. Finally. And now let's go on. And who is engaged in devotional service. This is the gist and the heart, again and again and again, of what Krishna speaks about in all of these verses, and again, other similar verses in the Bhagavad Gita, is that the core activity that a spiritual individual must engage in, if that person is to achieve spiritual perfection in all things, know themselves personally, and know God perfectly, what they must engage in is bhakti, is devotion, is loving worship of that supreme absolute. This is the path that indeed will give us every legitimate thing that we're looking for, every true thing, every eternal thing that we're looking for, is engaging in devotional service. And how do we engage in devotional service? With determination, Krishna says here. So as I've said again and again with many similar verses to this, we've looked at so many verses over the last several years in which it is explained again and again that the way that we do meditation, the way that we practice yoga, the way that we practice any sort of actual spiritual practice with the idea of a truly positive and transcendental end goal is that we do so with constancy. We do so consistently, we do so steadily, we do so without interruption. And how do we achieve that? With personal determination. That it is, in other words, important to us. That it's truly important to us. Again, you can scour all of YouTube right now. Indeed, you can scour the entire internet as much as you want, and you'll see millions of individuals, all of whom are claiming that I'm spiritual, this is how you're spiritual, buy my this, buy my that, and I'll teach you how to be spiritual, give me money, and I'll show you how to be spiritual, etc. There are tens of thousands of such things that are out there. But the one thing that they don't tell you is that no, you cannot buy your way to spirituality. Rather, what you need to have is something more valuable than all of the wealth in this world. What you have to have is determination. You have to have a will like steel that doesn't change. And when you have such determination, then you can achieve actually anything. But we're talking about devotional service very specifically. Even with bhakti, you cannot be successful even in bhakti without that determination, without wanting it more than anything in the world, and having that discipline to focus on the path like a laser beam. It is only with such determination that you will have spiritual success. And now, finally, Krishna says, and whose mind and intelligence are in agreement with me. What this means, really, in translation, to comment on this verse, the purport of these last few words, this is indeed meditation. This is absorption. This is samadhi. This is having one's dhi, one's intellect, one's mind, one's thinking substance, mental substance, focused completely upon God in such a way that God is the sole focal point of one's mental substance. So, whose mind and intelligence are in agreement with me. That is, that inwardly you are on the exact same page as God. You have that upasana, you have that proximity with God in such a way that it's like you're flying together off to Vaikuntha. So, whose mind and intelligence are in agreement with me. So, if an individual can do all the above that we just commented upon in this verse, in these two verses actually, what is the end result? What is the end result? He is very dear to me. And indeed, what does it mean to be dear to Krishna? Such a state for most beings is inconceivable. And this is our goal, is to be dear to him. So two very beautiful verses. And again, this is just the beginning. This is going to be a multi-part series in which we're going to explain how to become dear to God. And this is not some made-up self-help book that was written 20 years ago. This is not some life coach or coach of any kind who's telling you this. This is God himself. This is Bhagavan Sri Krishna. God himself explaining to us how we are to be dear to him, what we must do in order to be dear to God. So, in addition to today, please continue to come back, be here next Monday, the Monday after that, as we continue to go through these beautiful verses and learn how we too can be dear to God. Very good. With that, I thank you for listening to my discourse. And if there are any questions that you have about Sanatana Dharma, about the Vedic tradition, it would be my privilege and my honor to answer any questions that you have. So please feel free. Very good. There are a bunch of questions streaming in now. Please just give me a few moments to look at these. Here is a good question from Vasil, and it is Namaste Acharyaji. Does it affect our karma less negatively if we're engaging in unethical behavior or practices unknowingly because of time-bound societal norms, if we didn't know any better? That is a very good question, and I'll give you the definitive answer about this, because sadly, as is true for quite literally every single question about Sanatana Dharma, unfortunately, there's always debate that goes back and forth, and people seemingly don't know the answer. I'll give you the answer to this, and it is yes, of course. There still will be bad karma if you do something that is unethical, regardless of whether you understand that or not. But if you truly, truly do not know, then of course there is less negative karma. There still is, but there is definitely less negative karma nonetheless. Now, a person can ask, well, but that doesn't, well, again, what's the mantra of the Kali Yuga, the mantra of the week? It is, but that's not fair. That's not fair. Well, let me explain this. When it comes to understanding of ethical norms, there can be understanding in that you were taught from a very early age, indeed, what is right, what is wrong, but there's also intuitive understanding as well. So even, for example, if you were never taught that it's wrong to murder someone, intuitively you know that. Intuitively, there are rights and wrongs that are understood by people regardless of their society. So that being the case, these laws also are objective as well. They're not purely just left up to the subjective nature of the individual. So these are laws. So there has to be some punishment even if you are not aware. You know, it's kind of like a person coming to America from some odd country. I don't know what country this would be. And they go up to someone and shoot them, and the police arrest them, and they say, "Oh, well, I'm sorry, I didn't know that was illegal in your country." That, now, will that be accepted by a judge as an excuse? "Oh, you just didn't know. All right, well, on your way." No, of course not. Of course not. Well, in the same way, laws are objective karmically as well. So there will be some retribution that will have to take place, but will it be less? Yes, it will be if the person didn't quite have the knowledge. So I hope that answers the question. Give me just a moment as I look at some more of these questions. Very nice. Here's a very sincere question, and this is from Punk 839, and it is, "Respected Acharyaji, I like to see God as my best friend. I chant and I pray, hoping that God will hear my prayers. I never expect God to manifest in front of me, but how do I know that God is hearing me?" Very nice. That is a very good, sincere question, and let me definitely answer this. First of all, just a little bit of a humorous caveat, and that is, you say, "I never expect God to manifest in front of me." Oh, expected. Do not bar yourself from having that happen to you. On the one hand, have the humility to always have the attitude that, oh, something like that would be truly wonderful, and I hope that someday I'll be worthy of such a thing. But at the same time, never say to yourself that that will not happen, because God can do anything. God can do anything, including manifest before you. But that being said, the gist of your question is, but how do I know that God is hearing me? Communication is a two-way street. Communication is us communicating to God, and as you said, by chanting, by prayer, by recitation of mantra, etc. In this way, we are speaking to God. We are communicating to God. But then what you're asking about is the other way around. What you're asking about is, what is necessary such that I have confirmation that God heard what I said to him? Well, this is meditation. This is why, again, I've said this many times, the way that we practice is that we speak to God, but then in silence we listen to God's response. So this is why, unlike, let's say, some Hinduish organizations where the emphasis is always on chanting, 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 oh, we also believe in chanting, chanting, but we also believe in silence as well. There's no such thing as spiritual practice in which you do not, at some point at least, also be in silence in meditation and allow God now to speak back to you. See, what does it mean? You know, we all have some annoying friend like this who just talks and 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 doesn't allow us to get a word out. Well, we don't want to be that annoying friend to God. Getting back to being God's friend. Imagine that, being such an annoying friend to God, that it sounds nice, oh, I'm always chanting God's names, but suppose God also wants to respond. This is why the way that we do meditation in the ISDS is that we meditate upon the names of God. We recite all the authentic, authorized mantras that are revealed in the Vedic scriptures, specifically Om Namo Narayanaya. But then, in addition, we have a little period of silence in which we're simply focusing on our breath, and it is at that point that the mantra reverberates within us, and now we can actually listen to and feel God's response. So again, communication is a two-way street. How do you know if God is actually hearing you? Be open to hearing him speaking to you. And with faith. You see, to experience the presence of God is the greatest of all gifts. It's not something that just happens automatically. It's not like we have a right to it. Rather, it's something that comes with time. In the meantime, you have that faith that it will happen. That in time, what will happen is, again, you'll do mantra, you will pray, but then you'll have that silence. And then the next day, you'll do mantra, you'll pray, and then you have that silence. And eventually it will come to the point where indeed God will communicate back to you. And at that point, you'll know God heard you. In the meantime, you have faith that of course God is hearing you. God is all around you. God is within you. God cannot but hear you. God cannot but experience you. And in time, you will experience God. So I hope that was a helpful answer. Very good. Very good. So here's Rajaram, Sri Ram Varadarajan. And a very good question. Very practical question, actually. Namaste, Acharyaji. Thank you for this live stream. My pleasure. I'm glad that you're here. What was the human stature specifically like through the yugas? Were the Manushyas, that is the human beings, in the Satya Yuga really more than 10 feet tall? Very good question. Excellent question. They were much taller than 10 feet. That was in the last yuga, in the Dvapara Yuga, that they were approximately 10 to 12 feet tall. Yes, the further back you go in history through the yugas, in other words, the better things were, because this is how we understand history and the progression of time. The further back you go, the better things were, not the other way around. That's atheism. So yes, the further back you go, humans lived longer, humans were bigger, they were taller. Gravity affected them less. Gravity also affected them less. And I could go on and on as far as the physiology of human beings as you proceed back in the various yugas all the way back to the Satya Yuga, which is the actual golden age. So indeed, the typical human of the Dvapara Yuga, just one yuga ago, they lived to be approximately 1,000 years old. They were approximately 10 to 12 feet tall, etc. So that was the case. So in the Satya Yuga, yes, people lived to be an extremely long duration of age, of time, and they were much bigger, much healthier. Gravity did not affect them in the same way that it does now. Gravity was less oppressive, etc. So yes, human beings were qualitatively better, even as far as physiologically as well. So I hope that answers the question. Very good. Here's a nice question from Sandra G. And it is, Namaste Guruji. What is the root of an inferiority complex, and how does one get rid of it? Very good. Good question. And again, this is something that many people sadly suffer from, an inferiority complex. And let me say this. An inferiority complex is not the opposite of false ego. Some people think that's the case. That is not the case, actually. Healthy humility with self-pride is the opposite of false ego, actually. An inferiority complex is the opposite side of the coin of false ego. So in other words, with false ego, the idea is there is a magnification of one's artificial sense of self, to the point where I'm the best, I'm the greatest, no one is more important than me, and on and on and on. All of the silliness of false ego. With inferiority complex, on the other hand, it is an artificial shrinking of one's sense of self to the point of unhealthy debilitation, to the point where, rather than saying I'm the best, you say I'm the worst. Rather than saying I'm the most important person in the world, you say I'm the least important person in the world. But it's not humility. It's also, sadly, two things. It is an attempt to put oneself in the center of things, in the center of other people's awareness, but it also is just a very debilitating, let's say, psychic problem that comes about due to many different factors. Why does a person have an inferiority complex? Well, it can be due to very traumatic things that happened earlier in their life. They had parents, horrible parents, who told them horrible things about themselves. Oh, you're nothing, you'll never amount to be anything, etc., etc. It could be because they had friends that were like that. It could be because of other experiences that they had that had nothing to do with their family or friends. And it could just be a lack of self-esteem, lack of confidence, etc., etc. But in any case, it is something that is terrible and that must be overcome. Just as much as false ego has to be overcome if a person is to be spiritual, truly spiritual, in the same way, inferiority complex is not a positive thing. It's debilitating and it keeps a person from being spiritual. Now, you ask, how does an individual get rid of such an inferiority complex? The way that you get rid, interestingly, of both false ego, a magnified ego, and inferiority complex is the same. The way that you get rid of both is by direct association with individuals who are healthy and loving and compassionate devotees of Krishna, of Narayana. This is how you get rid of an inferiority complex. Because again, why do you have the inferiority complex? It's not always the case, but the vast majority of the time it is the case because you had bad association. Because as a child, it was, again, either your family, someone in your family, or friends, or culture, or horrible teachers. But it was bad association that convinced you that you were bad, that convinced you that you were someone unworthy. Well, now you need the opposite. If you are to transcend inferiority complex or, again, false ego, you now need to be friends, to have association. You need to be friends with individuals who are spiritually healthy and who can encourage you. And who can encourage you? Who can encourage you to bring out, to bring to the fore the true you. The true you. Who is, again, not this magnified ego on the one hand, but not this worthless worm on the other. This inferiority complex that tells you, I'm a worthless worm. It's neither of those. Rather, you are that beautiful, wonderful, loving, good Atman that is there within. But that's been covered. That's been covered by so many things that occurred in this lifetime, in so many lifetimes. And again, that has given you this false, here we go, false identity. See, both magnified ego and inferiority complex, they're false identities. The magnified ego says, I am God, I'm everything, I'm the most important thing. The inferiority complex just says the opposite. I am nothing, I'm a worm, I'm a worm, in the dirt, etc. Neither are true. They're both false identity. How does that true identity come about? Associate with individuals who they themselves have to a great degree, or if not, hopefully even 100%. They have understood their true self as Atman. When you understand your true self as Atman, then again, you have this healthy humility, but that also is steeped in self-pride. A real pride in your actual accomplishments, in who you truly are. Not a false pride, again, not egotism, but a good, healthy acceptance that, yes, I have humility before God, but I am eternal Atman, a spark, part and parcel of God Himself. God made me to be a perfect servant, and in humility, I take who I am as Atman and I serve God. And that is my true identity. Once you embrace that true identity, then the inferiority complex and again, the false ego will both melt away. So if you have this inferiority complex, please believe me, you can overcome it. You can overcome it. Never doubt that. But you do need help. You need good association of good spiritual people. So I don't know if you're on there already. If not, please join our Discord server, because believe me, you're going to find hundreds of individuals, the likes of which I just described, good association. And be friends with them. And little by little, the true you, that beautiful, wonderful you that is there inside, is going to come out. And let me tell you, when you find that true you, and figuratively speaking, you give yourself a hug and cry in relief, you'll be free. So I hope that helps with that question. Please give me just a few moments as I look through the rest of these questions, because we're officially over time, but I want to see if maybe there's one question that I can answer in a minute or less. Very good. I can answer this very quickly. Indeed, I've answered this before, actually, and this is Titus Andronicus. And it is, do Atmans tend to go through their reincarnations in a single universe until dissolution, or do they often jump between universes in between lives or in between such dissolutions? Yes, they can actually jump in between universes. So you're not limited to just one universe. There's nothing that limits us to a universe, because we transcend all universes altogether. All universes being material and ourselves being pure consciousness. Indeed, you can be in this lifetime in this universe, but then your karma will take you not only to a further lifetime, but indeed in a different universe altogether. Because indeed, Sanatana Dharma teaches that there are many, many different universes. Very good. Wonderful. This is the last thing I'm going to read, actually, because again, we are over time and I don't really have time to take any more questions, but I just saw this. This is very nice reply that Punk 839 is giving here, because I answered his question, his or her question previously. And now he says, your reply gave me goosebumps. Thank you so much for your incredible response. Every word was so true, especially the annoying friend scenario. I will certainly focus on meditation and those mantras. Wonderful. Thank you so much for saying that, and that makes me very happy that you took my words to heart. And indeed, please do so. Never give up. Never give up. Please immerse yourself in sadhana. Please immerse yourself in meditation. Please immerse yourself in all that is positive and good spiritually. And please believe me, I don't say this lightly. Please believe me. You will achieve the goal. You will know God. If you follow this path with sincerity and with devotion, you will know God. That's guaranteed. So thank you very much for that wonderful follow-up. And with that, we are indeed going to stop here. Again, we're going to be doing this as a series, because we're going to go through now in sequence the rest of the verses in this 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that all follow the same theme of how do we become dear to God. So I hope that you join us again next Monday, and I thank you very much for being here. Namaste. Jaya Sriman Narayana. Jaya Bhagavan Sri Krishna. Jaya Shri Guru. Sanatana Dharma Jayate. Dharma Rashtra Jayate. Suravansha Jayate. Om Tat Sat. Om Hari Om. And with that, everyone, I thank you all very much for being here. Between now and the next time that we get together, I ask all of you that in every way you please take very good care of yourselves.